Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the surprise new album from Eric Church, titled Mr. Misunderstood. You know, I've been asked a couple times what I think are my absolute worst reviews, or any that I actually regret. And here's the thing, I don't regret any of them, but in the course of doing nearly 500 of these things, you're going to encounter reviews where you look back and just kind of wince a little bit. Maybe a bad turn of phrase, a slip of the tongue, or error in song interpretation, or maybe just an album that has grown or cooled on you over time that makes your review not quite reflect your direct feelings right now. Now here's the thing. That happens. It's only human for opinions to evolve over time with more information or with changing emotions. Even just the passage of time, some albums read better as you get older. And reviews being a snapshot of how one feels at a very specific moment only further highlights how subjective they really are. As I said, they're my opinions. And as such, when you pair all those factors with an album that seemed designed to court controversy, almost relish it, with a major shift in artistic direction, well, those are the reviews that tend to spark the most vitriolic reactions, which takes us to Eric Church. Now, I'll wholeheartedly admit my review of his 2014 album, The Outsiders, not my best. But when combined with an album that showed Eric Church trying to bend country music in so many different directions, you kinda got a mess all around. It didn't help matters that Eric Church is kind of a contentious artist in country, drawing on tropes of the outlaw scene and some interesting songwriting ideas, but playing with them with not a lot of subtlety in the writing or instrumentation, at least on that album. Granted, if I were to reflect on the biggest miscalculation of The Outsiders, it would be the overwrought, leaden production, courtesy of perennially frustrating producer Jay Joyce, a name who many people who watch the show will probably be familiar with. And as such, when I heard the two had teamed up to deliver a surprise album of all things, delivered first to registered members of his fan club — I didn't know record fan clubs are still a thing — with 10 new songs not even cracking 40 minutes, well, I wasn't sure what to expect. When you consider this album was cut just a few months back and slipped out as a complete surprise, you can either view this as one of two things. Either as Eric Church satiating his fans something really quick and dashed off, or him attempting to pull a Beyonce, something that he might have been able to do if it wasn't for Chris Stapleton's huge CMA success launching his sales into the stratosphere and pretty much overshadowing all other news in country. But you know what, I already reviewed Traveler months ago, so what do we get with Eric Church's Mr. Misunderstood? Well, talk about an about face, that's for damn sure. If The Outsiders had shown Eric Church straying towards sounds and tones that were a little out of his depth for an attempted swaggering rock star bombast, Mr. Misunderstood is far more revealing in its stripped back simplicity. It feels very authentic for its efforts. Now, is it straightforward country music? Well, not really, but Eric Church has never really made that sort of straightforward music. This time, instead of drawing on progressive metal or arena rock, more hints of southern gospel and blues and soul. More importantly, it's an album that actually displays subtlety and nuance in its storytelling and composition. Not without a few missteps, but a sign that Eric Church is working with sounds and textures that he understands a lot better. And as such, it's one of the most welcome returns to form I've heard in a long time. So let's start with Eric Church himself. By necessity, this album strips back down to a range and volume that feels a lot more comfortable instead of some of the rock bellowing that he's tried before. And it's a lot more expressive in his vocals. Of course, he does experiment a bit to mixed results. I could do without his stab at falsetto on Chattanooga Lucy, for example. But that sort of rugged, honest, I feel very lived in, he quits himself just fine. A larger issue comes through in the vocal production, and look, I'll give Jay Joyce a bit of credit here. His work is nowhere near as clumsy as it's been in the past, but on the choice to emphasize that slight echo on Church's vocals and attempt to emphasize that live feel, it's a really kind of mixed for me, and I like it the less it's used. Nothing is as egregious as Like a Wrecking Ball, of course, but on the slower tracks, it get a little bit distracting, at least for me. And on the choice of vocals, Eric Church's choices for female singers, a bit spotty for me as well. The most notable being Andrea Davidson on Kill a Word, especially when he already had Rhiannon Giddens delivering her rougher, more soulful side, which is a natural fit. She sounded great. The clear standout, though, for me is Susan Tedeschi's verse on Mixed Drinks About Feelings. Not just for her fantastic delivery, but really humanizing that song by showing both sides of that breakup picture really worked well for me. Now, it helps matters that Eric Church is opting for subtlety it plays into his instrumentation and production. And yeah, I'll give Jay Joyce credit, it's nowhere near as overplayed and overblown as The Outsiders was. Even though I can't help but wonder if Dave Cobb might be a better fit as a producer for Eric Church in the long term. And even with that, there are some instrumental choices that I do question, particularly on the back half of this album. The choice to open up with some of the stiffer drum machines and process beats strikes me as a bit of a misstep, especially considering how prominent and textured the acoustic instrumentation really is. It's not obviously bad, but it is distracting. It doesn't quite fit. It's most distracting on Round Here Buzz, not helped by instrumentation that falls the closest to conventional radio. It will probably be a single, but it does feel a little bit odd on Kill a Word as well, especially against those ethereal vocals that open up the song. But those spacier textures that Church uses to accent his background, they're all across this record. They're more accented with a sturdy acoustic groove and piano melody. There is always that in the forefront. And there are plenty of subtle atmospheric touches that I really liked. From the slightly cavernous sound that accented the second verse on To Kill a Word that really fit well, to the emptiness emphasizing that late night in the second verse of Holding My Own, to the subtle backing vocals near the end of the title track that really came through well. But what will always be most noticeable is overall shift in sound. Eric Church has always worked in country rock with an eye towards blues and Americana, and this album shows those touches move most to the forefront, from the Don McLean-esque tempo shifts across the Wilco-esque melodies on the title track, to the great southern gospel swell of Mistress Named Music, and a stab at backwoods funk on Chattanooga Lucy. For me though, where Eric Church really shines is in some of the blues rock elements. Spikes and swells of organ against darker, buzzing guitars, the darker groove of Knives in New Orleans, the choke to bring in some seedier tones that feel strikingly authentic and yet not forced. Again though, if you got a producer more like Dave Cobb, it would be a shade more raw, but Eric Church really has a lot of control over his atmosphere, and his knack for nailing his hooks reminds me plenty of John Mellencamp and the more realist Americana musicians of the Outlaw era. Less posturing, more reality. Now granted, the writing has a lot to do with that too. That's where I think the biggest improvements have actually taken place. One of my biggest issues with The Outsiders is the brutish stabs of forming that outlaw outsider image. Not only was it ugly, it felt really forced and put on, and Mr. Misunderstood only proves that further, not just by focusing more on the journey and storytelling, but providing a more realistic picture of Eric Church himself in contrast. And sure, there's gonna be that lone wolf element, but songs like the title track and especially Record Year shows Eric Church is more of an introverted music nerd who collects and appreciates vinyl and can name drop indie artists not for the cred, but because he shows genuine appreciation for the art. And while I was initially wary of that because it is kind of pandering to indie music nerds like myself, especially in country, it rings as more populist and empathetic because Eric Church doesn't pull any punches with his framing. The title track might seem to cater to that teenage rock star fantasy that runs deep in every music nerd, let's be honest here, but it then shows the hard road ahead to get there, losing his faith to find his soul as he claws his way up, with the whisper that he understands that lonely feeling. Hell, if we're looking for one of the main motifs of this album, it would be that loneliness. From the solitary dream chasing of Mistress Named Music, which shows him born to lose his heart but struggling all the way, to the way of that vagabond run of Knives of New Orleans. And I like how it's never really clear what Eric Church actually did on that song. Did he kill his love in a bourbon-soaked rage, or is it more metaphorical? A crime against that Mistress Named Music in the restless swamps of New Orleans, trying not to fall into a deeper darkness. And that's where we get Kill a Word, where Eric Church ironically takes violent action to crush down hateful words, preferring to stick in stones that might not have that same lasting impact as the words will. Of course, most of this album isn't quite that abstract, but it does further highlight the loneliness even more, from the search for drunken relief from heartbreak on mixed drinks about feelings, to being left behind in a small town by a girl bound for the city on Round Here Buzz. Pretty conventional, but still a good song. And of course, there are the songs about family, easily the most conventional, but no less powerful, like on Hold My Own, where Eric Church yearns to return back to the road, but can't afford to leave them behind. Or 3 Years Old, the song where he speaks about the simple life lessons he learned from his young son. And yeah, it kinda is as corny as it sounds, but it speaks to innocence and imagination in a way I really did appreciate. But my favorite song on this album is Record Year, a track that shows Eric Church getting over heartbreak through a stack of old vinyl, finding solace in music that might not completely replace her, and he deep down knows that, but it'll do for now as he retreats down into his music. Yeah, definitely been there. In other words, if Eric Church was looking for a way to really win me back after The Outsiders, Mr. Misunderstood pulled it off. This is some of the best work of his entire career. Might even be his best album. Authentic and subtle. This is music for people who love music. I have to admit, it really did strike a chord for me. For me, solid 8 out of 10. Definitely a recommendation if you're looking for something on the blues rock side of modern outlaw country. And with the success of Chris Stapleton right now, expect to see a lot of this break onto country radio if that becomes a trend. And you know what? We'll all be better for it, so definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out you want me to take a look at, I would be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.